Dating an avoidant person often feels like playing a game where the rules constantly change and you're the only one who doesn't know what they are. One day, they're intensely present and affectionate. The next, they've disappeared without explanation. One moment, they're making plans for the future. The next, they're questioning whether the relationship even makes sense. This isn't random behavior or genuine confusion about their feelings. It's a sophisticated, largely unconscious system of manipulation designed to keep you off balance, pursuing, and emotionally invested while they maintain complete control over the distance and depth of the connection. The avoidant person has spent their entire life perfecting these patterns, learning exactly which behaviors keep partners hooked while preventing genuine intimacy. They've mastered the art of giving just enough to keep you hoping while withholding enough to keep you working for more. Most people respond to these patterns by trying harder, pursuing more intensely, accepting less while hoping for better. This response is exactly what keeps the manipulation effective. The avoidant person's games only work when you participate in them, when you react predictably to their withdrawal and inconsistency, when you organize your emotional life around their patterns. But there's another way, a strategic approach that not only protects you from their manipulation, but completely dismantles its effectiveness. This approach doesn't involve playing games in return or trying to manipulate them back. It involves understanding their patterns so clearly that you can see the moves coming before they make them, and responding in ways that refuse the role they've assigned you in their defensive dance. Recognize the hot-cold cycle and refuse to participate. The foundation of avoidant manipulation is the hot-cold cycle, a pattern so predictable that once you see it clearly, you'll wonder how you ever missed it. The cycle begins with the hot phase, where the avoidant person is intensely present, affectionate, and enthusiastic about the connection. They text frequently, make plans, seem genuinely interested in you and the relationship. This intensity feels amazing after periods of distance or in the early stages of dating when you're forming attachment. You respond naturally to this warmth by opening up emotionally, investing more deeply, allowing yourself to trust that the connection is real and stable. This opening is exactly what the avoidant person's system cannot tolerate. As soon as you respond to the hot phase, by matching their intensity, by showing that you're emotionally invested and expecting the connection to continue, the avoidant person's anxiety activates. Your investment registers as pressure and threat to their autonomy. The warmth that felt natural to them when you were still somewhat distant suddenly feels like trap closing around them. They experience your reasonable response to their pursuit as engulfment, as excessive neediness, as demands they cannot meet. This triggers the cold phase, where they withdraw abruptly and create distance that seems to come from nowhere, given how present they were just days or hours earlier. The cold phase is characterized by reduced communication, cancelled plans, emotional unavailability, and often complete disappearance without explanation. The contrast between the hot and cold phases is so stark that it leaves you confused and anxious, desperately trying to understand what changed, what you did wrong, how to restore the warmth that was so recently abundant. This confusion and anxiety is the point. The cold phase serves multiple functions for the avoidant person. It relieves their discomfort with the intimacy that developed during the hot phase. It tests whether you'll pursue them, confirming your emotional investment. It maintains their control over the relationship's pace and depth, and it keeps you focused on them and their behavior rather than on whether this relationship actually meets your needs. Most people respond to the cold phase by increasing their pursuit. They text more frequently, trying to reconnect. They ask what's wrong and whether they did something to cause the withdrawal. They work harder to demonstrate their value and understanding. They accept blame for the avoidant person's discomfort. This pursuit is exactly what the avoidant person's system is testing for. Your increased effort during their withdrawal confirms that you're emotionally hooked, that they maintain power and control, that they can withdraw without consequences, because you'll do the work to restore connection. This confirmation allows them to stay distant until they've regulated their anxiety about intimacy, at which point they return to the hot phase and the cycle begins again. Outsmarting this manipulation requires recognizing the pattern and refusing to participate in your assigned role. When the avoidant person enters the cold phase, instead of pursuing them, you match their distance with complete calm. You don't text them asking what's wrong. You don't try to restore the connection. You don't accept blame for their withdrawal. You simply allow the distance they've created to remain without trying to close it. This response disrupts the entire cycle because the avoidant person's pattern depends on you pursuing them during their withdrawal. Without your pursuit, the dynamic cannot function as designed. The key to refusing participation is maintaining complete emotional neutrality about their withdrawal. You don't do it to punish them or make them miss you. You do it because someone who withdraws without explanation has shown you clearly that they're not available for the consistent connection you require. You treat their cold phase as information about their capacity, rather than as problem you need to solve. This shift in perspective is crucial. The manipulation works when you interpret their withdrawal as something you caused and must fix. It fails when you interpret their withdrawal as their pattern that reveals their limitations. When you refuse to pursue during the cold phase, the avoidant person experiences something they rarely encounter: consequences for their withdrawal. Instead of you doing the work to restore connection, they must decide whether they want to restore it themselves. Instead of your anxiety and pursuit confirming their power, your calm distance suggests they might not be as important to you as they assumed. Instead of the cycle continuing predictably with your pursuit leading to their eventual return, they face the possibility that you've genuinely lost interest or moved on. This possibility triggers their anxiety in ways your pursuit never did. The avoidant person will typically test whether your distance is genuine or strategic. They might reach out casually to see if you jump at the opportunity to reconnect. They might create situations where you'll encounter each other to observe your response. They might post things designed to get your attention. All of these tests are attempts to restore the familiar dynamic where you're pursuing and they're controlling distance. Your response to these tests determines whether you've truly stopped participating or whether you're just employing temporary strategy they can wait out. Genuine refusal to participate means responding to their tests with the same calm neutrality you maintained during their withdrawal. If they reach out casually, you respond minimally, without enthusiasm or extended conversation. If you encounter them, you're polite, but not particularly interested in engagement. If they post things clearly designed for your attention, you don't give them that attention. This consistency demonstrates that you're not playing games or using strategy. You've genuinely stepped out of the dynamic because their behavior showed you they're not available for what you need. The hot-cold cycle can only continue when both people play their assigned roles. The avoidant person pursues and withdraws. You pursue when they withdraw and accept their return when they're ready to be warm again. Breaking this cycle requires you to stop pursuing during their withdrawal and to evaluate carefully whether you even want them to return when they're ready to be warm. This evaluation is where most people fail, because when the avoidant person does return to the hot phase, after encountering your distance, there's tremendous temptation to accept their renewed warmth and pretend the cold phase never happened. Accepting this return without consequences means the cycle continues indefinitely. True outsmarting of the hot-cold manipulation requires maintaining your boundaries even when they return. You acknowledge their return, but but you don't immediately match their renewed warmth. You express that their withdrawal was unacceptable and that you need to see consistent behavior over time before you'll invest emotionally again. This position is difficult to maintain because the avoidant person's return to warmth is what you wanted during their cold phase. But accepting them back without establishing that their behavior has consequences guarantees the cycle will repeat. They'll learn that they can withdraw at will and return when ready without any real impact on the relationship or your availability. Stop explaining yourself and watch them lose control. One of the most effective manipulation tactics avoidant people employ is making you constantly explain, justify, and defend yourself. They ask why you feel the way you do. They question your needs as if they're unreasonable. They express confusion about your expectations, as if wanting basic consistency and emotional presence is somehow excessive or unclear. They frame your perfectly normal relationship needs as demands or pressure. This constant requirement that you explain yourself serves multiple purposes for the avoidant person. It keeps you focused on defending your position rather than examining their behavior. It makes you doubt whether your needs are legitimate. It puts them in the position of judge, evaluating whether your explanations are sufficient. And it creates exhausting dynamic where you're perpetually trying to make them understand rather than simply expecting them to show up. The manipulation is subtle because the requests for explanation seem reasonable on surface. Of course, people should communicate about their needs. Of course, it's good to understand each other's perspectives. But with avoidant people, the requests for explanation are not genuine attempts at understanding. They're deflection tactics that avoid accountability while making you responsible for their comprehension and compliance. No matter how clearly you explain, no matter how reasonable your needs are, the avoidant person will find reasons why they don't quite understand or why your needs don't quite make sense to them. This pattern is evident when you notice you're explaining the same things repeatedly. You've told them multiple times that you need more consistent communication, yet they continue asking you to explain why that's important. You've expressed that their withdrawal hurts you, yet they continue withdrawing and asking you to explain why you're upset. You've stated clear boundaries about what you will and won't accept, yet they continue crossing those boundaries and asking you to justify why those boundaries exist. The repeated explanations serve no actual purpose because the avoidant person isn't listening to understand and adjust. They're listening to find weaknesses in your explanations that allow them to dismiss your needs as unreasonable. Outsmarting this manipulation requires you to stop explaining yourself entirely. When the avoidant person asks why you need something or why their behavior bothers you, you refuse to engage in the explanation cycle. You simply state your need or boundary without justification. When they express confusion, you don't take responsibility for their confusion by explaining more clearly. You acknowledge that they're confused, but maintain that your position is clear enough and doesn't require further elaboration. This refusal to explain strips the avoidant person of a major control mechanism. The key is recognizing that you don't need the avoidant person to understand or agree with your needs for those needs to be valid and for you to maintain boundaries around them. You don't need them to comprehend why you want consistent communication to decide that you require it from a partner. You don't need them to validate that their withdrawal hurts to decide that you won't continue accepting it. You don't need their approval of your boundaries to enforce those boundaries. When you stop seeking their understanding and approval, you reclaim power they've been holding through the explanation dynamic. When you refuse to explain, the avoidant person typically responds with increased demands for explanation. They'll say they can't meet needs they don't understand. They'll claim you're being unfair by not helping them see your perspective. They'll express frustration that you won't communicate with them, All of these responses are attempts to restore the dynamic where you're explaining, and they're evaluating whether your explanations are sufficient. Standing firm in your refusal requires recognizing these demands as manipulation rather than legitimate requests for clarity. Your response to their demands for explanation should be simple and unchanging. You might say something like, "I've stated what I need clearly. Whether you can meet that need is your decision, but I'm not going to keep explaining why I need it." This response puts the ball back in their court. They can choose to meet the need or not, but they no longer have the option of endlessly questioning the need while avoiding actually addressing it. This shift is profoundly uncomfortable for the avoidant person because it removes their deflection strategy. The avoidant person may claim you're being rigid or unwilling to communicate. They may frame your refusal to explain as relationship-ending stubbornness. These framings are final attempts to make you doubt yourself and return to the explanation cycle. Resisting them requires confidence that your needs are legitimate, regardless of whether the avoidant person validates them, and clarity that real communication involves both people working to understand each other, not one person perpetually explaining to the other who never quite gets it. When you stop explaining yourself, you'll notice the avoidant person loses significant control over the dynamic. They can no longer keep you spinning in circles trying to make them understand. They can no longer waste your time and energy on endless discussions about whether your needs are reasonable. They're confronted with simple choice. Meet the clearly stated needs or accept that the relationship will end. This clarity is threatening to them because it removes their ability to keep you hoping they'll eventually understand while never actually changing their behavior. Match their energy. Exactly without emotional investment. The avoidant person's manipulation relies heavily on you investing more emotionally than they do. They offer minimal effort and expect maximum return. They text sporadically and expect you to be available whenever they reach out. They make vague plans and expect you to hold space for them. They offer breadcrumbs of affection and expect you to treat those breadcrumbs as full meals. This imbalanced investment keeps them in control while keeping you hoping for more. The more you invest while they withhold, the more power they have and the less accountable they need to be. Outsmarting this manipulation requires matching their energy exactly without any of the emotional investment you've been providing. When they text you, you respond with the same level of enthusiasm and length they offered. If they send one-word responses, you send one-word responses. If they take hours to reply, you take hours to reply. If they make vague plans, you stay equally vague about your availability. This mirroring strips away the investment imbalance that's been allowing their manipulation to work. The crucial distinction is that this matching isn't strategy designed to make them chase you. It's authentic adjustment of your investment to match what they're demonstrating they're willing to invest. You're not playing games or trying to trigger their anxiety. You're simply refusing to overfunction in the relationship while they underfunction. You're bringing your effort level down to match theirs rather than continuing to pour energy into someone who's giving minimal effort in return. This matching energy approach reveals very quickly whether the avoidant person is capable of more investment or whether their minimal effort represents their actual capacity. If you stop overfunctioning and the relationship immediately becomes nearly non-existent because they don't increase their effort to maintain it, you have clear information that they're not actually invested in the relationship. The connection you thought existed was built primarily on your effort, and without that effort, there's nothing substantial underneath. Some avoidant people respond to your matched energy by increasing their own effort. When they notice you're no longer chasing, when they see you're matching their minimal investment instead of compensating for it, they may step up their game. This increased effort is where you must be extremely discerning. Is this genuine increase in their capacity and investment, or is it reactive pursuit designed to restore the imbalance where you invest more than they do? The way to tell the difference is by maintaining the matched energy even when they increase theirs, and observing whether their increased effort sustains or whether it drops back to minimal once they feel secure that they've restored your higher investment. Matching energy exactly requires you to stop making excuses for the avoidant person's minimal effort. You stop telling yourself they're just busy, or that they show love in different ways, or that they need more time to open up. You look at the actual effort they're providing, and you match it without supplementing it with the effort you wish they were providing. This honest assessment of their investment is often painful because it reveals that you've been doing most of the work to maintain the relationship. The matching also extends to emotional availability. If they share minimal information about their life and feelings, you do the same. You stop being the one who opens up emotionally while they remain closed. You stop creating intimacy through your vulnerability while they offer none of their own. You maintain the same level of emotional distance they maintain. This matching of emotional availability protects you from the vulnerability imbalance where you're exposing yourself to someone who remains protected behind their walls. When you match the avoidant person's energy without emotional investment, you'll notice your anxiety about the relationship decreases significantly. Much of your anxiety has been generated by the gap between the effort you're putting in and the effort you're receiving. You've been working hard to maintain connection with someone who's barely trying. This imbalance creates constant worry about whether they care, whether the relationship will survive, whether you're doing enough. When you stop over-functioning and simply match their energy, the anxiety dissolves because you're no longer invested in an outcome that depends on them changing. The avoidant person will likely notice and comment on your changed behavior. They might say you seem distant or ask if something is wrong. These inquiries are tests to see if you'll explain yourself and return to your previous over-functioning pattern. Your response should be simple. You're matching the energy they've been providing. If they want more, they need to provide more. This puts appropriate responsibility on them to increase their investment if they want the relationship to deepen. Build a life they can't compete with or manipulate. The ultimate strategy for outsmarting avoidant manipulation is building a life so fulfilling and complete that the avoidant person's games become irrelevant. The manipulation works when the avoidant person is central to your happiness and sense of worth. When their attention determines your mood, when their approval confirms your value, when your social and emotional life revolves around them, they have tremendous power to manipulate you through withholding and providing these things inconsistently. But when you build life that doesn't depend on them for fulfillment, their power evaporates. This life building involves multiple dimensions. Socially, you develop a rich network of friendships that provide connection, support, and enjoyment completely independent of the avoidant person. You stop putting your social life on hold, waiting to see if they want to spend time with you. You make plans with friends and stick to those plans, even if the avoidant person suddenly becomes available. You invest in relationships where reciprocity and consistency are normal rather than exceptional. These friendships provide the connection you've been seeking from the avoidant person, revealing that what you need is available, just not from them. Professionally or creatively, you pursue goals and projects that engage your energy and attention. You stop organizing your schedule around the avoidant person's availability. You commit to work projects, creative endeavors, skill development, or other pursuits that matter to you and demand your focus. These pursuits provide sense of purpose and accomplishment that doesn't depend on the avoidant person's validation. They also make you genuinely busy in ways that reduce your availability to the avoidant person's sporadic attempts at connection. Emotionally, you develop internal sources of worth and validation rather than depending on the avoidant person to make you feel valuable. You work on self-awareness and self-acceptance through therapy, journaling, meditation, or other practices that help you understand yourself and your patterns. You identify the wounds that made you susceptible to avoidant manipulation in the first place, and you begin healing those wounds. As you develop a stronger sense of your own worth, independent of anyone else's treatment of you, the avoidant person's approval or disapproval loses its power over your emotional state. Romantically, you open yourself to other possibilities rather than waiting exclusively for the avoidant person to become available. This doesn't necessarily mean dating multiple people, if that's not your preference, but it means refusing to put your life on hold for someone who isn't showing up consistently. You recognize that the avoidant person's behavior has shown you clearly that they're not available for the relationship you want, and you make yourself available to people who might be. This openness is ultimate refusal to participate in the avoidant person's manipulation because it demonstrates you're not waiting around hoping they'll change. As you build this full, engaging life, something remarkable happens. You stop caring as much about the avoidant person's games. When they withdraw, you barely notice because you're engaged with your own life. When they return, you're not sitting around grateful for their attention because you've been receiving attention and connection from other sources. When they play hot and cold, the temperature changes don't affect you because you're not depending on their warmth for your well-being. The manipulation loses all its effectiveness because you're no longer emotionally dependent on the person doing the manipulating. The avoidant person will notice this shift, and it will likely trigger their pursuit. Someone who's genuinely busy and fulfilled and not waiting around for them is exactly what activates the avoidant person's anxiety about loss. They're accustomed to people organizing their lives around them, staying available despite their unavailability. When you stop doing this, when they see you thriving without them, their defensive structure cracks. They might increase their effort, pursue more actively, demonstrate more investment than they've shown before. This is the critical juncture where most people fail. The avoidant person finally pursuing, finally showing interest, finally demonstrating investment is what you wanted for so long. The temptation to abandon your full life and return your focus to them is enormous. Resisting this temptation requires remembering that their pursuit is triggered by your unavailability, not by genuine development of capacity for intimacy. If you return your focus to them and rebuild your life around them, their anxiety will settle and they'll return to their usual patterns. The pursuit is reactive, not reflective of lasting change. The only way to determine whether the avoidant person's increased investment is genuine is by maintaining your full life and observing whether their effort sustains when you're not available to them in the ways you used to be. If they can maintain consistent effort, emotional presence, and vulnerability while you remain engaged with your own full life, they might be developing actual capacity for healthier relationship. But if their effort drops as soon as you seem secured again, you know their pursuit was manipulation, designed to restore the dynamic where you're focused on them while they remain ultimately unavailable. Building life they can't compete with or manipulate is the ultimate protection because it makes you genuinely okay with any outcome. If they step up and become genuinely available, you can choose whether to let them into your full life. If they continue their patterns, you can walk away knowing you have rich, meaningful life that doesn't depend on them. Either way, you win because you're no longer trapped in dynamic where your happiness depends on someone who's not capable of providing what you need. The manipulation only works when you need them to change. It fails completely when you've built life that works whether they change or not.